Well, it's been 10 years since the Iraq War began. What, if anything, have we learned? I'm joined by Aaron Dykes and Darren McBreen. Well, guys, it's been 10 years, but it's not just a dry history discussion that we're having here, because we're seeing exactly the same kind of stuff happening today in Syria and trying to justify conflicts with Iran. What do you think about the similarity between 10 years ago and today in terms of public opinion?
Well, here's a headline right here. Syria rebels regime blaming each other for first alleged chemical weapons attack. We've heard them cooking this up for months. We've already had stuff like Wag the Dog. The media publishes a Photoshop forgery to sell the war. We had the lies about Syrian Danny, who faked being in gunfire. And it's just a rehash of lie after premeditated lie we saw in the buildup to Iraq and in the continued selling of it, as they obviously intended the occupation to go on basically indefinitely.
Yeah. What do you think, Darren? You think the public's buying it this time around?
They will. A lot of them will, of course. with the help and aid.
Well, to the extent that they did last time.
Absolutely, I think they will. Unfortunately, it's sad, and I'm guilty as far as if you go all the way back to the first Gulf War, for example. I mean, I bought it hook, line, and sinker. When I saw what they did is they rolled out. I don't know if you remember, but it was the babies from the incubators that they said the Iraq Republican Guard came in and threw, I forget how many, I think it was 90 or so babies out and dumped them out in the street. And it wasn't just, hearsay. I mean, there was congressmen talking about it. Bush Sr. was talking about it. And then a young girl whose eyewitness testimony, 13 years old, or no, I think she was 15, up there crying, very dramatic testimony.
Turned out to be a diplomat's daughter, just making stuff up.
The ambassador to Kuwait's daughter, and she took acting lessons, we hear, years later. So they go through great lengths to tell a lie. And
I'm glad you brought that up, too, because when I gave these, we're talking about the cost of what happened with Iraq. And, of course, the first thing is the cost in human lives. And I was talking about the official estimates from our government being 100,000 and then other people totaling up to 190,000. Those were direct, I guess, immediate casualties. But as you guys pointed out, if you go back and look at sanctions and other stuff, it's well over 1 million.
We've got at least 1 million of sanctions under the decade during Clinton and kind of the latter years of Bush 1, and then an estimated another 1 million dead in civilian totals and everything during the Iraq War from 2003 on. We know this from watchdog groups and people monitoring it, of course, not from official estimates in the government. But yeah, it's a continued lie that, oh, it's going to be over real quick. It's only going to cost this much money. It was how many times more in cost? It was
44 times more,
tremendously more expensive, and they had to know that.
And then when we look at the casualty figures, there's a slow kill because of DU and that sort of thing with our troops, as well as the people in Fallujah. You look at the cancer rates there.
Horrible.
And the infant mortality and the birth defects. It is comparable, if not a little bit more, than Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Yeah, what kind of weaponry did they use? I mean, it's hard to tell, but I mean, they're having severe problems with birth defects and that sort of thing. And what this reminds me of, this 10-year anniversary reminds me is in 2003, I listened to Alex Jones and his team of reporters and his writers, and on the Alex Jones show, they called it how it was. They said there is no weapons of mass destruction, and Alex had Scott Ritter on the show, and it kind of reminds me of the same thing now. Here we are with the Department of Homeland Security and this massive arms buildup. We report it. Nobody else pays any attention except for Drudge. A few weeks later, Lou Dobbs is commenting on it, Sarah Palin, and then Forbes. But once again, just like back in 2003 with the run-up to the Iraq War, InfoWars is on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's hope that the same thing this time around. Let's hope that we've got a little bit more of a footprint. I mean, we're already seeing an effect with the DHS ammo purchases, right? This is starting to break. It has been picked up by the mainstream media as well as the congressman, as we reported on earlier today.
That's right.
So, I mean, we're having more of an effect now. InfoWars, Alex Jones has a much wider footprint, and so maybe,
It is worth noting, though, back in 2003, I was in college then, while a lot of the TV-watching public bought the lies hook, line, and sinker, it was pretty transparent to a lot of people, if they were paying attention at all, really regardless of their stripes, because there were massive protests against the Iraq War, even in February, before before the war launched in March. I protested against it in March at the time, and a lot of people did. A lot of people saw through it, and it was difficult to watch those lies, but I guess you tell them enough and they become accepted.
Well,
and then once those lies are exposed, they spin new lies.
And even back then, though, you could see the power of the left-right paradigm, because there was a lot of the liberals and a lot of the left that weren't buying it, and they were the ones that were prominently out there protesting it, while a lot of, I have friends that are conservatives, they were all for it.
That's true, yeah.
They wanted to go in there. And sadly, I'll never forget watching TV when, it was 2003, and they started bombing Iraq, and I could hear neighbors up and down my block cheering like a football game was going on. As those bombs are going off. So some
shock
people
and awe.
really thought shock and awe indeed.
Yeah, they didn't see the scheme.
Well, if we want to review some of the specific headlines about some of the specific lies, you had things like in 2005, the Downing Street memo came out. The media, CNN, among others, spun it and tried to act like, well, the war was just inevitable. No, the document specifically leaked from Downing Street, of course, in Britain, with the correlation between Tony Blair and George Bush, that military action was seen as inevitable. Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action justified by conjunction of terrorism and WMD. But the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy, and then you had countless people warning about this deception. We just had a memo that broke a few weeks ago in 2013 where you had Rumsfeld with this memo about, should we say Saddam's moving against the Kurds? Should we say that Saddam's connection to September 11th was discovered, or the anthrax attacks? Should we have a dispute over the WMD inspections? Of course, we know they went with the WMD. It was a naked lie. You had a lot of people warning from within the Bush administration, like Treasury Secretary O'Neill, that they were planning the Iraq invasion before 9/11. You had others, too. You had George Tenet, who later wrote a book about it. You had other documents that showed they were planning Iraq ahead of 9/11. And, of course, we know that from studying things like the Project for a New American Century. The British knew that we were planning the Iraq war before 9/11, and it really just goes on and on and on. And I really want to get into this, the long-term geopolitical things. You can check out documentaries like Adam Curtis, who's a BBC reporter, The Power of Nightmares. He goes all the way back to the 60s, where guys like Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, Cheney, these kind of guys, as they came into power with these various presidents, they had been building up the Muslim extremist element since the 60s, and they had something called Team B that for decades over-exaggerated the power of the Soviet Union so that they could justify a bigger and bigger Defense Department budget and so they could keep that Cold War going. Well, by the time that the Soviet Union falls in 91 officially, you had the emergence of the Wolfowitz Doctrine. In 1992, it became public. People like General Wesley Clark, who we're going to go to a clip here in a moment of, he was told within the Defense Department circa 1991 that they wanted to exert their geopolitical influence. They saw an opportunity with the fall of the Soviet Union, so they wanted to go after these chess pieces in the Caucasus states, in the Middle East, and other areas, Northern Africa, etc.
Well, look, we trained 100,000 mujahideen, under Bush Senior, and who among those? Osama bin Laden. There you go. Trained CIA asset right there.
And we look at this and it's like, who's benefited from this, right? It's not the American people. It's not the Iraqi people for sure, right? Mm-hmm. But the American people are not more secure. We live in a less secure world. There's blowback, as Ron Paul would point out. And look at the tremendous cost that we're going to be, we've paid a tremendous cost in human life, tremendous cost in financial things that are going to be paid for by generations. And yet we have a military-industrial complex that did quite well off of all this, didn't they?
And they've used false flags and all manner of lies to get us into these wars, knowing that it's so hard to get out of them.
I was just going to say we're creating blowback because we're making enemies.
I want people to see this clip. We've played it before. We've covered it. It was on Democracy Now! It was on Forward TV. But here's the headline. We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, among them Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. And I don't even think that list is exhaustive. But obviously there's designs on Iran. We've already done Iraq. Syria's happening right now. Libya was last year's news. Somalia and Sudan have had their own internal wars. years. We've been drone striking them in the name of terrorism. And Lebanon is tied with all these countries through the larger pretext of terrorism, and presumably we may be getting to them shortly. I want to roll this clip about how General Wesley Clark, I believe is a 4-star general, he ran for president in 2004. He was warned at the Pentagon from his buddies, from guys like Wolfowitz, from guys like Rumsfeld, that all this was coming.
I went through the Pentagon 10 days after 9/11, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir, he says, it's worse than that. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran.
Well, it's like so many things that the government does. You know, we have, the public understands that there's, or believes that there's one justification or one agenda, and the government's got a completely different agenda. I mean, look at education, for example. You know, we're thinking that we're sending our kids to school so they can learn to read and write. They're getting sent to school so they can be trained to trust the government and you know, be trained to live in a police state, essentially. And we see the same thing with the war on drugs, you know, but these guys have got a different agenda than what we've got.
They've got a geopolitical agenda, and it's long-term strategy. And again, the clip goes on. This was the stuff he was told immediately after 9/11, but then he reminisces on the things he was told in 1991, which I already mentioned, the Wolfowitz Doctrine, and how Wolfowitz personally told him they had designs on these countries. And again, in the year 2000, you know about this, Darren, before 9/11, we had the formation of the Project for a New American Century, headed by William Crystal of the Weekly Standard, but Wolfowitz was in there, Cheney was in there, one of the Bushes was in there.
In the same list.
It's the same agenda. They wanted to be the first and last superpower. They saw an opportunity with the Soviet Union gone. They knew a new one would be rising. I guess that's China, might have been someone else, and they wanted to take opportunity with it while they could. And they said they were going to have multi-theater wars, and of course they needed a new Pearl Harbor-like pretext.
Yeah. So Americans look at this basically and say, you know, how did we screw up so badly? You know, we spent all this money, all these lives, and here we've got a government that's more friendly to Iran than ever, right? Same thing we look at with the educational system or whatever, but we don't understand, the American public doesn't understand that there's an agenda here, and they're getting exactly what they intended. Let's close up this discussion, and we'll talk a little bit about this media complicity. You know, we look at CNN. The one that you started out with was a Downing Street memo, Aaron, and that memo, when they were reporting it, they started reading it, and then they abruptly stopped at the point where they said that Bush wanted to have this, you know, done through a military justification. They just stopped reading it. So basically, they read a little bit of the truth, but we didn't get the whole truth. And when you cut out the whole truth, basically you've got a lie. And we're still seeing that happening today. There's not much coverage about the 10-year anniversary, and when CNN covers it, they put stuff up like a story about Jessica Lynch, for example. Right?
Yeah, Pat Tillman, all these lies. Curveball came out, admitted the WMDs were false. And isn't it shameful? 10 years and they're still not done. They'll say it's not a war. It's still a war. Darren, you've covered it in your special reports. We saw the fake news during the Gulf War. They're still doing fake news.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to touch on UN Ambassador Joseph Wilson.
Oh, that's right.
Who went out there, and Bush told him to investigate the yellow cake from Niger, saying that Saddam Hussein was attempting to buy the yellow cake to make nuclear weapons. And he came back and he said, look, I got nothing. You know, I have a whole team of investigators. We got nothing. And then...
So they outed his wife, huh?
Well, a couple days later, Bush is doing a address to the nation, and he mentions that Saddam Hussein tried to buy yellow cake from Niger. And, you know, Wilson's back home along with the CIA folks that were out there investigating all this time, and they just couldn't believe it. You know, they're like, my God, he's lying to everyone right in front of our faces. So then a couple days later, Wilson went on Meet the Press and told them, you know, say, hey, this is not what happened. You know, there's really not, Saddam did not try to purchase yellow cake. And what happened a couple days later, that's when the Valerie Plame got outed through the media that she was a CIA asset. Valerie Plame being Joe Wilson's wife. And so they put her in a lot of danger. And the guys that were in the CIA that were working along with her, they were in danger. They had to shut down companies that were CIA front companies, you know. So, and what was their...
Retribution.
What was their purpose? was to stop weapons of mass destruction from coming into the country, from like terrorists and all that. So, I mean, absolutely treasonous what the Bush administration did.
Well, they say people who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And so let's just hope that this is such recent history. Let's hope that the American people don't fall for it a second time. The old saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Let's hope that people learn something from this, and let's hope that, just like we're starting to see with the ammunition purchases, let's hope that maybe the truth is going to get out this time. Maybe InfoWars and alternative media is going to be able to get the truth out that the mainstream media won't do.
Yeah, wake up, folks. Turn off your TVs and check out InfoWars and alternative media.
And people made the argument these wars were to install central banks in the final countries that didn't have central banks. And you see things like Paul Bremer's 100 Orders, which is basically a corporatist occupation of Iraq, all the way down to mandating GMO seeds and just everything.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate
Thanks.
it. Great job. Well, we are in an info war, and we're in an info war so that we don't have to fight real wars. And you can help us get that information out by becoming a Prison Planet TV subscriber. You can help to get that information out to other people. 10 people at a time can watch it. Of course, you can pass it out to more people than that. It's more important than ever because the government's MO, the government's agenda is not changing. As you heard Aaron Dykes talk about, they've had a long-term agenda of countries to go into and overthrow for quite some time. This is not an agenda of providing more security for the United States, but this is an agenda for bankers, an internationalist agenda. You need to educate people about that. Best way you can do that is to support InfoWars through Prison Planet TV or buying products from the InfoWars store. All of that helps to fund our operation. Well, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.